Across the UK, tens of millions now identify as non-religious. Yet public services, especially in healthcare, have often struggled to reflect this shift. Nowhere is this more apparent than in hospital chaplaincy, a service historically rooted in religious traditions, yet tasked with offering emotional and existential support to everyone, regardless of belief. Research shows that only 4% of hospital visits by religious chaplains are to non-religious patients, despite more than half the UK population identifying as non-religious. This suggests that when NHS chaplaincies teams are exclusively religious, the pastoral needs of millions go unmet. In 2018, Dr Lindsay De Wal became the first non-religious head of chaplaincy in the United Kingdom's NHS. A trained counsellor and humanist pastoral carer, Lindsay took on this landmark role as the lead chaplain of the Buckinghamshire Healthcare NHS Trust. In 2021, she was appointed to the head of chaplaincy and pastoral care team at the Sheffield Teaching Hospitals NHS Foundations Trust, one of the largest NHS providers in the UK, where she now champions person-centred, inclusive spiritual care for people of all beliefs and none. She's also the chair of the Non-Religious Pastoral Support Network and has received numerous accolades for her work, including the National Health Service Journal's Award for helping to diversify the NHS chaplaincy services. I'm delighted that Dr. De Wal joins us today to explore how chaplaincy is changing and what truly inclusive models of care looks like in practice. From end-of-life support to the power of listening without judgment, Lindsay joins us to discuss the values that can unite us across belief systems and how humanist approaches are reshaping spiritual and pastoral care in healthcare settings. Lindsay De Wal, thank you so much for joining us on Humanism Now.
Thank you for having me as well, James. Glad to be here.
And congratulations again on your landmark and groundbreaking appointments that you've achieved. But if we could start at the beginning, please, could you tell us more about your journey into the pastoral care profession and at what stage you identified as a humanist pastoral carer?
Yes, of course. I think I start with the latter because I was always quite an inquisitive child. I was told very philosophical from the start. According to my mum, I didn't speak until I was 5 and it came out in full sentences. I don't know if that's true, but that's my mum's perspective. But I was always very much keen about exploring life and what it meant to be alive and questions that you don't always have immediate answers to, such as why are people, for instance, born rich or poor? Why do people hurt each other? Why do you get up in the morning? What motivates you? And when it came to deciding what you want to do for the rest of your life when you're a student and needing to select a course, I kind of wanted to do something that grabbed my heart and was aligned with my values and exploring those questions of, well, life, what it means to be alive. And I couldn't really find anything other than, for instance, psychology and looking at, for instance, how people are doing mental health wise, but that wasn't really aligned with what I wanted because I'm not interested in specifically diagnosing people and having particular labels assigned to them. So I thought maybe it's worthwhile exploring psychology until I saw a university solely dedicated towards humanist chaplaincy. And that was at the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht. And they looked at all of those kind of things I was so keenly interested in about worldviewing, theology, sociology, psychology, all of the different kinds of ways of how to live a good, moral, ethical life. And that's been, since I started, I fell in love with it. And that's what became, well, me living that profession in real life. So I'm really grateful to have found that.
Yeah, that sounds like it was perfect timing. So is it more common then in Holland for there to be more humanistic pastoral care and chaplaincy?
It is. It's also a different cultural context because I was quite naive in that sense, thinking I'm just going to fly over the pond. It will be exactly the same. Dutch, English, it's going to be quite similar, right? It's only an hour distance and also time zone wise. But that couldn't be more true. Obviously, it is still a very much Christian country, the UK. You also have the bishops in the House of Lords, for instance. And in the Netherlands, it is more secularized. They also developed that university I just spoke about quite recently after they established the Humanist Association in Holland. So that was after the Second World War. It was Jaap van Praag who actually started that Dutch Humanist Association because after the Second World War, he felt that there was an erosion of a community of those that were identifying as non-religious. They didn't have anywhere to go other than the Social Democratic Labour Party they had at that time. But that community sense had ceased to exist because it just became the Democratic Labour Party. So he felt, out of sheer necessity of humanity, so call to humanity, to not again have a world war in the sense of where people understand human values and connect with each other. And potentially that the world war derived from nihilism. He founded that Dutch Humanist Association. And that was right after the Second World War. And that's how that university then as well developed. So it's very much more ahead of its time compared to the UK, where we only had the non-religious pastoral support network since 2016. So you can see the difference there.
Yes, huge difference in terms of timeline. So was it it sounds like it was a bit of a culture shock then, because I was interested to learn about when you may have realized that pastoral care could be offered from a humanistic perspective, but it sounds like actually it was introduced in that way. So was it quite different to learn that actually in the UK, it is still much more embedded in religious traditions?
It is, and particularly when you look, for instance, at the healthcare sector, because you've got many different areas of institutions, maybe police, military, education, prison. Healthcare has been there for chaplaincy since the start of the NHS, if we link it to the National Health Service. And that was predominantly a Church of England role. So it was all Church of England that actually started within healthcare chaplaincy. And then it developed into other faith-based practitioners that were added to it, still usually from that point of view of Christianity. So may there have been free churches that were added, for instance, or Baptist or Quaker. And then it became more other faiths, such as Muslim, Sikh, Hindu. And then all of a sudden, we had these weird people knocking on the door that were humanists and had no kind of link to a higher power or a god or gods in that sense, but were completely, how do you say that, horizontally transcendent rather than vertical transcendence in that sense in 2016. So it was quite a shock, like you say, a culture shock with, oh, wait a second, we hadn't thought of other people that might be non-religious that might want this service or could provide this service in chaplaincy. Yeah.
So what were the main challenges or questions that you faced in those early years, 2016 to 2018, entering the UK Health Service, presenting yourself as a humanist chaplain? What was the feedback or initial response that you were receiving from colleagues and patients?
Yeah. It's funny because I recently teach as well for the new school secretary in counseling, and some of these students, they're preparing, for instance, for job interviews, and common questions that might be asked, particularly as a non-religious or humanist practitioner. And I was starting to write down the questions I've been asked on my journey into it. And it's over 60 questions long, James. I kid you not. But it's the basis of how I can pass on how their responses might be towards it. Funnily enough, people that are patients or service users never queried my non-religious status or humanist status. They actually really welcomed it, particularly if they were non-religious or if they were faith-based, because we see people of any kind of background. They would be either intrigued or just happy that there was somebody lending a listening ear in times of their need. Also for me to still refer onwards if they needed a specific ritual of a particular faith resource within our multi-faith and belief team. I think it was mostly a shock for people that work as chaplains within chaplaincy departments. Specifically, and that's also what I discussed within my PhD, I think it's because it rocks the bedrock of chaplaincy services, also needing to prove its validity amongst many other different well-being services, also in light, for instance, of psychology. So if you were to look at, for instance, hierarchy of needs, having a roof over your head, but also funding for the service, people might want to diversify ideally on paper, but when it comes to the nitty-gritty, it might look like if we're going to diversify and put a humanist in there as well, is that going to cost another post for somebody who might be faith-based? So that is the crux in that sense, and the friction when it comes to the practical nitty-gritty. And that's something that's really key. How can you actually go from surviving as a service, where you're trying to, put your hands out for funding, to thriving? And that comes with actually making an impact with your service and measuring it well, qualitatively and quantitatively, with how to add to it. It shouldn't ever be at the expense of inclusion of all faiths and beliefs.
And when in 2018 you became the first non-religious head of chaplaincy in the NHS, did this feel particularly groundbreaking at the time?
I thought it was normal coming from a Dutch background. I thought, yeah, this is something we have in Holland. And then all of a sudden, all of the phones were ringing and we got many media requests that weren't just limited to the Netherlands or the UK. I eventually had people pointing out that they were discussing my appointment in Australia on some radio channel, for instance, and many different varieties of reactions from very positive to very, how do you say it, conservative in the sense that they were worried about what it would signal. So I became a symbolism of, is this a way to get rid of chaplaincy of religion, particularly in a secular institution such as the NHS and within a healthcare setting? So there was a lot of challenge, I would say, and that included nasty comments, as you can imagine, of course, with free comments online, or particularly somebody who sent to my work address at the time in Buckinghamshire a threatening letter that Jesus died for me all the way from Texas, USA, along with leaflets how to get to heaven, which you can only do apparently from the USA, according to that leaflet. So it was a very interesting time. And for me, it was a signal of, okay, I need to become not just a symbol of this is the humanist coming in to secularize everything, but hello, my name is Lindsay. I am like you, a chaplain who really cares about human beings. And I happen to have a non-religious belief that I too care about, like you do from your faith-based perspective.
That's that's shocking that someone would go to such an extent. But what was the response from your religious colleagues around you? And were there any more well-meaning sort of concerns or questions or assumptions that were raised you had to counter at the time?
Yes. First of all, I think I couldn't have been here, and I want to shout those accolades to people who are faith-based within the chaplaincy field, because we have many advocates that were able to open up the door for myself and other colleagues coming into the chaplaincy field, saying we do need to include people of no religious beliefs. And this isn't a threat. It's just an extra promotion of chaplaincy service in general. So that was absolutely amazing. So I never discounted it towards people who were hesitant because they had a faith. It's more about the personality of that particular individual, just to be clear on that as well. I think those that were very hesitant, they had questions around, well, do you have any kind of way of praying with people? How do you offer salvation at the end of life? What do you do if people say, is there a heaven, for instance? What if you're the only practitioner at the time and people ask you to do some religious kinds of ritual? So all of those concerns that were narrated from the framework that they've only known, that was particularly Christian and not even other kinds of faiths in that sense, but particularly a Christian framework that we were entering into. And those questions I've explored with an inquisitive and curiosity-based stance with them, with what does it mean to you? What do you do? This is what I can do and travel with. But it's never to replace. We work within a team. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there's lots that can be learned from each other in that environment. And I imagine it's very personalized to the patient as well. So it's good to have that diversity of views within the staff.
Yeah, exactly.
So the phrase spiritual care can mean different things to different people. How do you interpret spiritual care in your work?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that is often debated within chaplaincy and wider context in that sense as well, because everybody uses spirituality in so many different ways, and you start looking up concepts or definitions. There are many different ways of how to engage with that concept. What I've drew on as it developed over the years that I've now been in this position, and I've done a lot of teaching on it as well to clarify my position as a humanist point of view, is from a spirituality point of view, you can connect to a higher power of God. So those that are faith-based, where you have that transcendence, so something that's greater beyond you that you connect with, which is absolutely valuable for somebody who has faith in God or a higher power. For me as a humanist, I don't have that link that travels up. For me, it's that transcendence. So something that's beyond me that I connect with. There's not just Lindsay, but my connection with something broader and wider, with the community around me. So horizontal transcendence, the world, the cosmos, nature, other fellow human beings, and doing good in this life that I'm given. And that for me is more than enough, because it transcends who I am and adding to that overall love, compassion of my fellow human beings and world travelers, if you're looking into the naturalistic world as well. So that's something that I clarify with spirituality and spiritual existential stance.
I love that framing of it, because I think this point about transcendence or connecting to something bigger than ourselves is often critique that we have to face, and talking about it as more of a vertical transcendence and a spreading outward rather than the horizontal is a nice way of saying it's the same process. It's just the fact that it's different directionality is a nice way to increase that empathy across the divide, I think. So I love that way of looking at it. And I know you've spoken previously about the art of listening. Why is this central to your approach?
So many people are not heard on a daily basis. And if you just imagine a conversation that you might have with a friend, a partner, a family member, we often think that we listen, or for instance, that you just want to be heard about something that you're going through at work. But actually what often happens is, or you go and input your own experiences into it, such as, I had a dream last night. Oh, that's strange. I had a dream. And you start talking about yourself. Or people start giving you advice, for instance, rather than just hearing you with what you're going through. And actually really actively listening to somebody can be so healing in itself. And when people feel that they have the time to share whatever that might be without somebody wanting to interrupt with their voice, opinion, thoughts, own experiences. So active listening is not just being silent all the time, but most of it is actually, you can have a whole conversation where you say nothing at all and it's just body language. But reflecting back what people have said, and they might not even have heard what they've said until you reflect it back. And it can really unlock certain things for people where they might decide to do something because they've heard their own words mirrored back to them. Or they question it all of a sudden with, do I actually mean that when I say that? That's really interesting that you picked that up. Because we are constantly looped in our own mind with what we might think. But when you test it out with somebody else who's really there with you, walking alongside, all of a sudden you start querying it. Is this actually what I believe and think? Or should it be challenged?
That is always a surprise. That experience, I think, is universal, of saying something and then immediately recognizing that perhaps that's not what you think, or that you've surprised yourself that's something that you think.
Yeah.
And so are there any practices that you think everybody could adopt, or simple things that we could all, tricks you could teach us perhaps for better listening?
I think it's pausing, and this is really hard. It sounds easier to say it, but pausing your judgments for just a bit. You might have them in your head, keep them there for the moment as you listen to someone, and practice that silence. Because if you're in a conversation with just the two of you, there's always somebody who will fill the silence. Let it not be you for once. Just extend that comfort zone where you feel uncomfortable, you want to chip in, you want to say something, extend it, count to 10, and let the other come back with whatever they're thinking about. Because conversation driven by the thoughts in our heads that we're formulating, and sometimes somebody needs that extra time to work it through. So silence is a good thing. Allow that space. So that's one of the easiest tips that I can give you today. Count to 10.
I'll put that in practice, but maybe not while we're recording the conversation.
A podcast is difficult.
And how has your background as a counsellor influenced your approach to care?
I think for me, that has a lot to do with the skills that are similar to a pastoral conversation. So it's the act of listening. It is how you summarize things back, the feedback, for instance, that you give. It is potentially the posture that you hold, or the awareness of your reflective practice that is required. So reflection in action, such as postpone the judgment that I was talking about before. What's going on in your head? What are your needs as a practitioner versus the person you're listening to, and being able to temporarily put that to the side. And also to reflect on action. So afterwards that you had the conversation, have clinical supervision, for instance, to talk it through with somebody else that's in the field. And I think those are really good handheld practices that can really come into both fields. And that was also from my research where the chaplains identified with other practitioners, such as counselors or psychotherapists. That's something that does overlap. And that's absolutely fine. The difference usually that they pointed out is that it's less medicalized of these other kind of well-being support services. So it's very flexible chaplaincy. And of course, that spiritual layer and ritualistic care that is often provided. And they're specifically trained within those areas. Yeah.
And do you think there's something that humanistic carers, so I guess not just non-religious, but there's something in being humanist which brings something distinctive to the bedside?
I think actually when I was reflecting on particularly what do we bring differently to other faith-based practitioners, is I think we all start with person-centered care and meeting the person where they're at. Nobody should be there, and if they are, that's not great practice, proselytize their own faith or belief. You're there for that person in general. So I think what we add is choice for somebody who wants to speak to somebody who's like-minded, of a non-religious belief system. And like you mentioned in the introduction, for instance, David Savage's research when he was at a London trust, only 4% of people who were non-religious had that support given within a very, very large trust. And it's very little percentage for a large population that's non-religious. To caveat that, that's not because faith-based chaplains don't care about people who are non-religious, but most likely linked to people feeling it's not for them because of that like-minded status. So there should be an option, there should be a choice that people can go for. And that's why it's an add-on to have non-religious pastoral care. Then on top of that, what we can offer is non-religious rites and rituals. So often at the start when I was getting questions, you can just do pastoral and spiritual support, but you can't do the religious bit. And that's what they kind of describe chaplaincy within healthcare: pastoral, spiritual, and religious care. But religious care, when you break it down, is all about the practice of a community that comes with rites and rituals. And for non-religious people, you have that too, but just in a different way. May it be weddings, funerals, baby namings, all of the kinds that you might see in faith-based practices, but just from a non-religious point of view.
And we're seeing the numbers of those increase all the time as well. And the number of celebrants and ceremonies in the UK is growing. And I think it's the same around the world as well. So I want to, in your role, in your leadership role that you've taken on, what practical changes have you made or have you seen that's helped ensure that chaplaincy services are inclusive and available and, I guess, promoted to all patients?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to do around the marketing of what chaplaincy means. So that starts with education. Now, that's not easy in a very large trust. We've got roughly 19,500 staff members are often the key to getting referrals and for people to even point towards the chaplaincy service. So there's been a lot of education towards any kind of healthcare provider, may it be, for instance, the doctors, consultants, and nurses, to also just reception and porter staff, because everybody plays a role, about what is chaplaincy, and it's not just called the vicar. And faith-based chaplains agree with that there's a very narrow-based view of chaplain equals call the vicar. So a lot of teaching. So that's a practical step. What is spirituality? What we just discussed about. Also, for instance, signage, explaining the different kinds of faith and belief systems that we represent. And an exciting project that I'm doing now, actually, within the hospital is getting together loads of faith, belief, and non-religious traditions to have a digital virtual space. Like when you have an open house, the 360 cameras that can make you move through the different rooms so you can see a house inside. Yeah, we're going to do that within our chapel space and in nature around there for people to actually engage when they're bedbound with different faith, belief, and non-religious traditions and resources. So we're again showing that it's a plurality of different kinds of values and worldviews that comes with the chaplaincy team. And that's publicly shared, so influencing national chaplaincy, so anybody can use that. And also nationally looking into, for instance, job vacancies and adverts with how that's written is another critical point that I've been trying to raise and put my 2 cents in, because we're often recycled kind of job descriptions where people just use back in the day, we need a vicar, somebody who's done theology and, I don't know, has experience in the church, rather than we need a practitioner who is trained as a spiritual and pastoral care provider, who's done X amount of hours and has the skills too. So that's a lot of reworking that on national level.
Yes, it's very interesting. And I'm glad you've spoken a lot about what we can learn and the similarities that exist across beliefs. And it's something which I think we should look to emulate and we can praise religions for, is that letting people know that there is always someone there to talk to, a community leader who is there to listen to them as and when they need it, is a hugely important feature. But yes, I think that we are, as one of my recent guests said, we're about 2,000 years behind in terms of telling people that we can be available for them. So yes, it's great getting the message out there, and utilizing marketing, I think, is really important as well, and letting people know that this is available to them. And I wonder, with that in mind, if anybody was interested in either finding out about pastoral care or perhaps becoming a carer themselves, where would be the best place to start?
You can go to your webpage and just type in become NRPSN and volunteer. That will lead you to the Humanist UK pages where you can actually apply or read more. If you want to read more first, you can apply afterwards, which will then land you on our accreditation courses where we will assess skills for you to be equipped to go into any kind of sector that you might be interested in to become a humanist pastoral care. So it's not just solely for healthcare environments, but we also have people in prison. We also have people in education. Some people work with homeless charities, for instance, as well. And we just got the green light last year that we're now welcomed into the military as well. Although that's still a longer route because it's just new and people do need extensive experience. That's something that somebody can work towards as well. And otherwise, you've got me too. So you've got my link tree, I think, as well, that's attached to this podcast or the video. You've got my contact details then too by Humanist UK. So you can email me too if you're interested.
And are we seeing requests for support? I guess the question is, are we seeing the number of carers match the requests for support that are out there, or is there an increasing need for more pastoral carers?
There's really an increasing need for pastoral carers. We now actually get flip side of the table because we were not really welcomed before in 2016, and we really had to work hard to get into organizations. They now see the added benefit of having somebody to offer that choice, that like-minded choice of a non-religious pastoral care. But now we are struggling to provide it. So we have shifted with the non-religious pastoral support network where we train volunteers to high quality of standards. And we got a lot of people, about 40% within overall NHS trust as a volunteer. And 22 people are actually salaried, which is, well, about a massive increase since 2016 in that sense. But we are getting now requests. I really want somebody who's a humanist and we don't have anybody in the area. So if you're interested, there's definitely a need and there's definitely people who want you. So if you feel called to it around meaning and purpose and giving back in that horizontal transcendence line, it's really a worthwhile profession.
And thank you for, you've been one of the driving forces behind that acceptance and the growing understanding and need for humanistic care since 2016. I think you've contributed greatly to the change in attitudes that we've seen. And with that in mind, what would you like to see going forward in terms of either changes in chaplaincy or looking at the NHS more broadly, either in humanist care or care in general?
I think it's two-pronged. So within any kind of institution that pastoral care gets embedded, it's still sporadic within, for instance, education settings, because there's no kind of set way of how you do chaplaincy within, for instance, higher education or even lower education for that part. The military is an exciting development as well, but they require 2 years usually of equivalent to a curacy, which is usually, of course, from a Christian perspective, experience. So that takes a little while to them to get in, but to see that flourish, because the Dutch have done that again for ages. And they had a humanist who was the head of military chaplaincy. But then I think the other part of it is as well that within healthcare chaplaincy that I operate in, that we really need to start demonstrating the validity of the service. It's not just because chaplaincy was there from the start with the NHS that we have a place at the table. You've seen the recent news with, of course, NHS England becoming the Department of Social Health and Care instead. There's lots of people that are going to lose their jobs. There are redundancies. You need to demonstrate your service for it to survive. And there's still very little qualitative and quantitative data around trusts being collected for chaplaincy services. So I plead as well within my research, start researching the validity of chaplaincy, how it's different to other services, what's like with it, and to also lobby government to make it a recognized profession. So under HCPC registration, now it's just desirable to be part of the UK Board of Healthcare Chaplaincy if you apply for jobs, which holds the professional standards for the field. With no other kind of psychotherapeutic background or psychology background would it be desirable to be registered with the BACP or BPS. You have to do it. So there's something about professionalization of the service to get with the times and to show rigor to who you hire within any kind of institution.
Yeah, I think as we see technology taking so many jobs as well. I hope that those interpersonal skills and those interhuman skills that you've mentioned, listening, care, and probably getting trained in those areas as well, will become more valuable in society, because these are the things that we can't replace.
Yes, our humanity.
Thank you so much for your time, Lindsay. Before we go, we have our standard closing question, which is, what's something which you've changed your mind on recently?
That I stopped caring what other people think, and I give that advice to anybody else who would love to listen and finally let go of opinions of others. I think the journey that I've been through has really taught me that. Go with what your gut, your heart, and your values tell you. And that's how you lead a meaningful and purposeful life. Stop worrying about what other people think. I think that's the best piece of advice that I had that I didn't integrate until very recently.
Is this an added benefit of non-judgmental listening?
Yes, to yourself as well, not just to others.
We'll put that in practice. Lindsay De Wal, thank you for joining us on Humanism Now.
Thank you for having me.